The dress was the color of deep water at dusk. Not blue, not purple, something in between, something that didn't have a clean name in the English language, which was maybe why Dara Osai-Mensah had stopped in front of the window and pressed her fingertips lightly against the glass like she was trying to touch the idea of it. The mannequin wore it with the indifference that only mannequins and very beautiful women could manage, the fabric falling in long, clean lines from a structured bodice down to a hem that grazed the floor. There was embroidery along the collar, tiny, deliberate stitches in gold thread that you wouldn't notice unless you looked, and then once you did, you couldn't look away. Dara looked. She always looked, that was the problem, she supposed. She had the eyes of someone who couldn't stop noticing things, the way light changed on fabric, the difference between a seam sewn by a machine and one sewn by a hand that cared. Her mother had called it a gift. Her landlord called it a distraction. Dara called it the thing that had kept her alive through the worst years, and the thing that now, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, had made her 20 minutes late picking up her daughter from school, because she'd stopped in front of this window on the corner of Mercer and Broome, and simply could not move. Her phone buzzed. "Zuri, Mom, where are you? Miss Patterson is giving me the look." Dara smiled and typed back, 2 minutes, baby, I promise." She took one last look at the dress, then she pushed through the door. The boutique was called Verlaine. She knew the name from the fashion circles she used to orbit, back when she was still designing, back when people whispered that she was the next great thing and she'd been naive enough to believe them. Verlaine had launched 6 years ago and had become, in the language of the industry, a house with vision, editorial darlings, red carpet fixtures, the kind of brand that didn't advertise because it didn't have to. She wasn't here to buy anything. She'd told herself that on the way in, and she would tell herself that again on the way out. She just wanted to see the construction up close. She wanted to run her thumb along a seam and know whether the quality matched the reputation. A small bell chimed above the door. The interior smelled of cedarwood and something floral she couldn't identify. The floors were pale marble, the lighting warm and low, the kind of environment designed to make you feel like you'd wandered into someone's home rather than a store, which was, of course, a very deliberate and expensive illusion. There were perhaps 7 items on the floor. 3 women browsed with the unhurried ease of people for whom money had never once been a source of anxiety. Dara walked toward the rack near the window, toward the dress. She was wearing her good coat, the charcoal wool one she'd saved for 3 months to buy, the one that still fit beautifully because she'd tailored it herself after she'd lost weight during the year she'd rather not name. Her hair was out today, a full crown of coils that she'd moisturized that morning, and she wore gold studs in her ears that had belonged to her grandmother. She looked, she knew, like herself. Which was to say, she looked like a woman of quiet elegance who had learned to carry dignity like it cost nothing. She reached the dress. Her fingers found the fabric, a silk charmeuse with a woven underlayer she hadn't expected, and she inhaled slowly. This was extraordinary. Whoever had designed this had understood something about how fabric needed to breathe, needed to move with the body rather than on top of it. She turned the hem in her hand, found the seam, and felt the precise double-lock stitch. "Excuse me." Dara looked up. The woman standing before her was thin in the way that read as performance rather than nature, dressed in beige from her turtleneck to her pointed heels, her blonde hair pulled back so severely it seemed to be doing the work that her facial expression couldn't quite manage alone. Her name tag said Claudette. She was holding a glass of champagne that she had clearly poured for herself and not for any of the customers. "That dress," Claudette said, with a smile that didn't reach anything above her cheekbones, "is $4,800. Dara nodded pleasantly. "I know. I just wanted to make sure you were aware. Before you," she gestured vaguely, "before you kept handling it. What do you think about moments like this? Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't belong somewhere you had every right to be? Drop it in the comments. I want to hear your story." Dara let the hem fall from her fingers, slowly, without hurry. "Thank you," she said, and she said it with such composure that Claudette blinked, caught off guard by the absence of the reaction she'd been fishing for. Dara Osai-Mensah was 34 years old, and had been building something from rubble for the last 3 years. Before the rubble there had been the dream, and it had been a real dream, not the vague, soft-focus kind people described at dinner parties, but the specific and burning kind that had a name and a shape and a deadline. She had graduated top of her class from Parsons. She had apprenticed under a Ghanaian British designer named Kofi Akampong, who had told her twice, in the quiet way of a man who chose his words like currency, that she had a rare eye and rarer instincts. She had started her own small label at 27, Senarm, named for her mother, and for 2 years it had been more than she'd hoped. A profile in an independent fashion magazine, a capsule collection that sold out in 11 days, an inbox that was starting to fill with the right names. Then Marcus. Not the man himself, to be fair to him, because Marcus Osai had not been a villain in her story. He had been a man she'd loved genuinely and married with her whole heart, and the problem hadn't been love or intention, but the absence of the thing that love and intention cannot substitute for, luck. His architecture firm had taken on a contract that had collapsed. A debt that had seemed manageable had doubled, then tripled. They had tried together to hold everything up, and for 18 months Dara had poured every dollar from Senarm into keeping the family afloat, and then Senarm was gone too, and then Marcus was so hollowed out by guilt that he'd become someone neither of them recognized, and the marriage had followed. The divorce was not bitter. That was the thing people found hardest to understand. There was no screaming, no legal war, no cruelty exchanged. There was just two people who had loved each other sitting across a table, looking at what they'd lost and understanding that they could not rebuild it together. They had wept. They had been kind. He still called on Zuri's birthday and showed up when he said he would. But Dara had been left at 31 with a 6-year-old daughter, a closed label, a resume that looked like it belonged to a different life, and an apartment in Bed-Stuy that she could afford only because her cousin Amara lived in the second bedroom and split the rent. What she had not lost, what no debt and no collapse and no grief had been able to touch, was the eye, the instincts, the way she could look at a piece of fabric and know its story before she'd finished unfolding it. She was working now at a mid-level bridal atelier in the Flathen district, altering other women's wedding dresses, adjusting hems, taking in waists, adding sleeves where the bride had changed her mind. She was good at it. She was overskilled for it in the way that sometimes made her chest ache at the end of a long day, but she was good at it, and it paid, and it kept her hands in the work she loved. Zuri was 9 and extraordinary. Dara did not think this merely as a mother. She thought it as a person with functioning eyes and ears. The child was funny in a dry, precise way that startled adults. She read books above her grade level not because she was trying to impress anyone, but because, as she had explained to her teacher with 9-year-old sincerity, the other books moved too slowly. She had her father's cheekbones and her mother's eyes, and she wore her hair in 2 puffs that she decorated with whatever she found interesting that week, which had so far included small plastic dinosaurs, a collection of mismatched buttons, and memorably, a single pressed flower from the park. Dara was doing this for Zuri, and also for the version of herself she hadn't yet given up on, and also because there was a dress in a window on Mercer Street that she had designed, in her mind, 100 different ways, and one day, she would make something like it again. She had come into this store because she had needed to feel, for 5 minutes, like that day was not impossibly far away. She had not come in to be managed. Claudette did not leave. That was the thing. A different person, a smarter person, a person with a better read of the room, would have made the comment and retreated and allowed the interaction to dissolve into the ambient noise of the store. But Claudette had the look of someone who had made a calculation and was committed to it now, and she positioned herself 2 steps to Dara's left in a way that was not subtle. Dara moved to the next piece on the rack, a sharply cut blazer in ivory baucle that was extraordinary, and behind her she could hear Claudette's heels on the marble, a half-beat behind her own footsteps. She was being followed around the store. Dara took a slow breath through her nose. She knew this feeling. She had been knowing it since she was 12 years old and first became aware of the way certain spaces responded to her body in them. The feeling had a particular texture, not hot anger but something colder and more exhausting, a tiredness that went bone deep, the weariness of being required once again to decide how much of yourself to spend. She turned. "I'm just browsing," she said. Her voice was even. "I'm not going to damage anything." Claudette's smile didn't waver. "Of course not. I just want to make sure you're finding everything all right. Some of our items don't have price tags on the floor. If something doesn't have a listed price, it's because customers who need to ask can't afford it," Dara said. "I know how this
This gown
works."
is exquisite, but it's not what
A
matters
small,
most.
cool silence.
What we exchange here is far more important.
Then Claudette said, with the delicate cruelty of someone who had convinced themselves they were being helpful, "I just wouldn't want you to fall in love with something that's out of reach. It saves everyone the awkwardness." There it was. The woman at the far end of the rack, a tall redhead in a camel coat who had been examining a skirt with mild interest, looked up. Her eyes moved from Claudette to Dara and back again. With a flicker of discomfort, she made no move to address. She looked back at the skirt. Dara stood very still. She thought of Zuri, waiting outside her school in the October cold with Miss Patterson giving her the look. She thought of the alterations she had to finish tonight, the beaded hem on Mrs. Galvez's second marriage gown that needed 4 more hours of careful work. She thought of her grandmother's gold studs in her ears. She thought of Kofi Akampong saying, "You have a rare eye," in the particular quiet way of a man who did not say such things carelessly. She thought, "I will not let this woman see me flinch." She opened her mouth. The door opened. The small bell chimed. And the man who walked in changed everything, though no one in the room knew it yet. He was unremarkable on first glance. That was the first thing. He was perhaps 40, with a lean build and dark brown skin and the kind of face that was attractive in a way that registered slowly, not the immediate symmetrical beauty of someone who'd been told about it their whole life, but something quieter, with depth. He was wearing dark trousers and a charcoal sweater that had clearly been made rather than bought, the kind of garment that whispered quality without announcing it. He was looking at his phone with a slight frown, the expression of a man whose mind was somewhere else. He was alone, no assistant, no entourage. He joined the small queue at the register behind a woman buying a scarf, his eyes still on his phone. Claudette clocked him, then she turned back to Dara. "Can I help you find something that might be more in your budget?" she said. "We have some lovely accessories starting around." She said she was browsing. The voice came from behind Claudette, and it was not loud, but it had the particular quality of a voice accustomed to being heard in rooms where other people were also speaking. Claudette turned. The man had looked up from his phone. He was watching the exchange with calm, dark eyes. "She said she was browsing," he repeated pleasantly. "That's usually enough in a store." Claudette blinked. "Sir, I was just..." "Can't afford that dress," he said, and he looked at Claudette with a directness that was not hostile but was absolute. "Is that what you suggested?" If you've ever witnessed someone being treated this way and said nothing, or said something, what did you do? What do you wish you'd done? Tell me below. The room was very quiet. The redhead in the camel coat had stopped pretending to look at the skirt. Claudette opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "I was simply making sure the customer was aware of." "I'd like to speak with the manager," the man said. "I am the floor manager," Claudette said, with recovered stiffness. "Then I'd like to speak with whoever owns this store," the man said, and he slipped his phone into his pocket and looked at her with an expression of mild patience that was, somehow, the most devastating thing Dara had ever seen in a retail setting. A very long pause. "And who," Claudette said with the last of her authority, "should I say is asking?" The man looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Dara. Something moved across his face, not pity. She was grateful for that, but a kind of recognition. The look of someone who had also been required to decide in many rooms how much of themselves to spend. He turned back to Claudette. "My name is Natasaya," he said. "I own it." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. Claudette went through several expressions in quick succession: disbelief, recalculation, a brief terrible understanding, and then a white, cold panic that she tried and failed to arrange into composure. The champagne glass in her hand had become a prop she no longer knew what to do with. "Mr. Asaya," she said, I didn't realize you were coming in today." "Clearly," he said, not unkindly. That was the thing that seemed to undo her most, not the anger she'd expected, but its absence. He turned to Dara. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what that was." Dara looked at him. She had been in the fashion industry long enough to know the name Nathaniel Asaya, though everyone, she'd always heard, called him Nate. The son of a Ghanaian textile merchant who had taken a seed inheritance and built something that had redefined what African luxury fashion meant on the global stage. He'd founded Verlaine 6 years ago after a decade working quietly in European houses, learning their systems so that he could eventually build something their systems had never imagined. He was, by several measures, one of the most powerful people in the industry. He was also, apparently, someone who waited in his own stores, queue behind a woman buying a scarf. "You don't need to apologize," Dara said. "You didn't do anything." "No," he said, "but it happened in my store." A different woman might have let the moment carry her into gratitude or relief. Dara, who had learned to carry herself with great care in moments that felt like they were designed to knock her sideways, simply nodded. "I was about to leave anyway," she said. "I have to pick up my daughter." She moved toward the door. "Wait," he said. She turned. He seemed to consider something. "What do you think of the dress?" he said, "the one in the window." Dara blinked. It was such an unexpected question that for a moment she just looked at him. "The dusk-blue one." "Yes." She glanced back at it. "The construction is exceptional," she said. "The silk charmeuse with the woven underlayer, that's not something you see often. Most houses wouldn't bother with the interior structure when the exterior reads clean, but whoever designed this understood that the way fabric falls from the inside is what determines how it moves on the body." She paused. "The gold embroidery on the collar is slightly too heavy for the weight of the neckline. It pulls forward by about 3 millimeters when the mannequin is standing upright. On a real body it would pull more." The silence she'd stepped into was different now. Nate Asaya was looking at her with an expression she recognized because she'd worn it herself, the look of someone who had been surprised into genuine attention. 3 millimeters, he said. "Maybe 4, she said honestly. "I'd have to hold it." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "How long have you been in fashion?" "I left fashion 3 years ago," she said. "I'm in alterations now." His eyes moved briefly, carefully, with zero performance, to the charcoal coat she was wearing. "You tailored that yourself," he said, not a question. "Yes. It's a good job." "I know," she said, and she said it without apology, and something in his expression shifted very slightly, like a door opening 1 inch. Her phone buzzed. "Suri, Mom." "I have to go," Dara said, and this time he let her. She got to the school 8 minutes late, which meant Zuri was standing on the steps with her backpack on both shoulders and the expression of someone who had rehearsed several things to say and was choosing between them. "You were 19 minutes late," Zuri announced. "I was 8 minutes late. I've been counting since 3:15. "That's not how being late works, baby." Zuri considered this, decided to abandon that particular line, and pivoted to, "Ms. Patterson let me organize her bookshelf while I waited. She has 3 copies of the same Jane Austen book." "That sounds like Ms. Patterson. Why do people need 3 copies of the same book?" "Different editions, different introductions." Zuri thought about this for half a block, which meant she found it acceptable. She had her mother's eyes and was currently wearing 4 plastic rings on different fingers and had a single dried orange peel tucked into her left hair puff, which she had not explained and which Dara chose not to question. "You okay, Mom?" Zuri said. in the careful way she sometimes had, the way that made Dara's chest ache with the knowledge that her child had become someone who watched her for signs. "I'm good," Dara said and took her hand. "I saw a beautiful dress today." "Did you buy it?" "No." "Are you going to?" "One day," Dara said. Zuri looked up at her. "You always say that." "Because it's always true," Dara said. "One day keeps moving forward, that's the whole point of it." Zuri seemed to find this satisfying, and they walked the rest of the way home in the amber light of a Tuesday afternoon, the city loud around them and the dried orange peel bouncing in her puff. And Dara did not think about Nate Asaya until she was sitting at her work table that night with Mrs. Galvez's beaded hem, and found that she couldn't stop. 3 days later, she received a letter. Not an email, a letter, handwritten on heavy cream paper with a small embossed V in the top right corner, delivered to the atelier where she worked by a young man in a dark jacket who left before she'd finished reading it. Ms. Osai Mensa. I've been thinking about the embroidery since Thursday. You were right about the pull. Our head of construction confirmed it yesterday morning, and we're taking it back into the studio. I'm embarrassed it wasn't caught before the floor. I find myself curious about someone who can identify a 4mm structural fault from across a retail floor. If you're willing, I'd like to buy you a coffee and talk about what you've been doing since you left fashion, and what fashion has been missing since then. This is not a pity gesture. I don't make those. This is the other kind of gesture, the one people make when they've met someone whose eye they'd like to look through for an hour. N. Asaya. Dara read it twice, then she sat with it for a long time. Then she called her cousin Amara and read it out loud. "Oh," said Amara, who had a very good instinct for most things. "Oh, he's interested." "He's interested in hiring someone," Dara said. "Both can be true," said Amara. "Also, go. I have Mrs. Galvez's hem." Dara. "And Zuri has a field trip permission slip I haven't signed." Dara. "Do you believe second chances can come dressed as ordinary moments? A letter, a wrong turn, an overheard conversation. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what you think." She went. They met at a small Ghanaian-owned coffee shop in Brooklyn called Crado. Nate had suggested it, and the choice told her something, though she wasn't yet sure what. He was already there when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 coffees and the particular stillness of a person who had learned to wait without performing impatience. She sat down. He slid one of the coffees toward her and said, "I asked them for a good one. I hope that's all right." "It's very all right," she said and sipped it, and it was excellent. They talked for 2.5 hours. She had been prepared for it to feel like an interview and had steeled herself accordingly, had rehearsed in her mind the clean, confident language of someone presenting their professional history with appropriate distance. But Nate Asaya did not ask her about her professional history. He asked her about the textile merchant she'd mentioned in passing, her grandfather in Accra who had taught her to read fabric before she could read words. He asked her what she thought was wrong with the current luxury fashion industry in a way that suggested he had his own answer and wanted to measure hers against it. He told her about the first time he'd walked into a European fashion house and been given, with great politeness, every resource he needed except the one thing he'd come for, the authority to make the decisions that mattered. He told her about the label he'd built after that and the philosophy behind it, that luxury should be an expression of craft and cultural depth rather than a set of social markers designed to exclude. He said the word velaine came from a textile term in a West African French dialect. He said it meant to make visible what was always there. He said he had been looking for 2 years for a creative director who understood both the technical and the philosophical dimension of that. He said he had stopped looking on Thursday when she told him about the embroidery. Dara set down her cup. "I haven't designed anything in 3 years," she said. "I know, I looked up Senam after you left the store." She was very still, and And I found the write-up from the capsule collection that sold out, and a photograph from the Parsons showcase. He paused. And I found the news about your husband's firm, the collapse. Dara said nothing. I'm not bringing that up to be intrusive, he said. I'm bringing it up because I want you to know I understand why the gap is there, and I want you to know it doesn't change what I see when I look at your work. She looked out the window at the street. A woman walked past with a stroller, a FedEx truck idled at the curb, a yellow leaf separated from a tree and descended in a long, slow spiral. I designed the dress, she said. Nate looked at her. Which dress? The one in the window, the dusk-blue one. She looked back at him. Not literally, I didn't design your dress, but I designed the same dress. In my mind, 3 years ago, on the same logic, the double underlayer, the clean fall, the collar embroidery. I sketched it in the margins of a permission slip for Zuri's school trip to the botanical garden. A pause. I wasn't going to say that. I'm glad you did, he said, and he said it with a quietness that sat differently than anything else he'd said. Why? Because it means your instincts didn't stop, he said. It means the 3 years didn't take them. It means you've been designing the whole time, just not on paper. Dara looked at him. She had been looked at many times in her life and in many ways, with desire, with assessment, with the particular cool survey of someone deciding her value. This was different. This was the look of a person who had found something they thought was gone from the world and was being careful not to move too fast. I need to think about this, she said. Take all the time you need, he said. I'm not going anywhere. She believed him. She didn't know why she believed him, she just did. She did not, as it turned out, have all the time she needed, because 3 days after the coffee meeting, a woman named Sylvie Marchetti-Laurent entered the atelier where Dara worked and changed the stakes entirely. Dara didn't know who Sylvie Marchetti-Laurent was at first. She presented as a bride, early 30s, dark-haired, arriving for a fitting of the Giambattista Valley gown she'd ordered through the atelier 6 months earlier. She sat in the fitting room while Dara worked on the hem with the quiet patience of someone who did not need to fill silence. Then she said, I heard what happened at Verlaine. Dara looked up. The scene with the saleswoman, Sylvie said. Claudette Arnaud, I heard Nate was there, that he's been asking about you. Asking who? Dara said carefully. People know people, Sylvie said, and her tone was not unkind, but it had an edge. Sylvie Marchetti-Laurent. I'm a consultant. I work with several houses on creative director placements. Verlaine has been on my board for 2 years. I've submitted 5 candidates for that creative director role. Dara understood. He hasn't moved on any of them, Sylvie continued. Now he meets you in a store and writes you a handwritten letter, which Nate Asaya has never done for anyone in a professional context that I'm aware of. She looked at Dara in the mirror. I'm not telling you this to discourage you. I'm telling you because you should know that stepping into that space means stepping into a history you don't fully see yet. What history? Sylvie was quiet for a moment. Then, Nate had a creative director 2 years ago, someone he trusted completely, who took the design library, the unpublished collection sketches, the creative roadmap he'd spent 4 years building, and brought it all to a competitor. A pause. He doesn't trust easily anymore. The letter is unusual. If it's real, it means something. But if you go in there without knowing what that kind of trust costs him, you'll make mistakes you don't need to make. Dara sat back on her heels. Why are you telling me this? She said. You submitted 5 candidates. I'm essentially your competition. Sylvie looked at her in the mirror for a long moment. Because I saw the Senarm capsule collection, she said. In 2019, at a pop-up in Bushwick, she paused. I almost cried, which I don't do. I've been in this industry for 20 years and I almost cried at a pop-up in Bushwick. She looked away. You should know what you're walking into. Dara called Nate that evening. She asked him directly about the previous creative director. There was a long pause. Sylvie told you, he said, not accusingly. Yes. Another pause, then. His name was Damien Laurent. He was brilliant. I gave him everything: access, trust, credit, equity.
This gown is
I thought we
exquisite,
were
but it's
building
not what
something
matters
together.
most.
What we were
What we
actually doing
exchange
was
here
him
is
learning
far more
everything he could
important.
so that he could take it to Mason Cartel. A beat. The collection he sold them, the spring collection they showed in Paris 18 months ago, was built on 3 years of my creative work. My mother's textile archive that I digitized and shared with him. My team's unpublished sketches. Dara's chest was heavy. Did you pursue legal action? We are still in it, he said. It's slow. Fashion law is slow. And proving creative ownership is. He stopped. It's expensive in ways that aren't just money. I'm sorry, she said. I shouldn't have let it make me closed, he said, but it did for a long time. She thought about what Sylvie had said. She thought about what it meant to trust someone with the most essential part of yourself and have them use it against you. She thought about Marcus and the different shape of that same loss. I understand that, she said quietly. I thought you might. They were quiet on the phone for a moment, 2 people in separate apartments in New York, the city humming underneath them both. I want to take the role, Dara said. I think I want to say yes. Then say it, he said. I'm scared, she said. I know, he said. I'm not asking you not to be. She thought she'd said yes. She nearly had. Then the week came apart. It started with the call from her landlord. The building had been sold, which she'd known was coming, and the new owner was converting it to market rate, which she'd feared was coming, and her current rent would triple in 90 days, which was the number that turned fear into physics. She sat with the letter on the kitchen table and did the math 4 different ways, and it came out the same every time. She could not stay where she was. She told Amara that night. Amara, whose name was on the lease too, who had her own crisis to navigate now, who sat across the table and didn't try to fix it immediately, which was worse somehow than if she had. Then Zuri's teacher called. Not Ms. Patterson, the school counselor, a warm, careful woman named Dr. Singh, who had been watching Zuri with the particular attention of someone who knew how to see children. She said Zuri was fine, wonderful, brilliant. She said that 3 times, clearly wanting Dara to hear it, but that she'd been writing stories in her free time, long, detailed stories, about a girl whose mother worked very hard and was always a little sad, and the girl in the stories kept trying to fix the sadness and couldn't. Dara thanked Dr. Singh and hung up and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. She had been careful, she had been so careful. She woke up before Zuri and composed herself in the bathroom mirror, so that when she came out she was the version of herself her daughter needed to see. She smiled at breakfast. She was present and warm and silly and engaged. She had not let Zuri see the math on the kitchen table or the tremble in her voice when she'd read the landlord's letter. But Zuri saw anyway, because Zuri had her mother's eyes. Have you ever tried to protect someone from your pain, only to realize they already felt it? What did that moment teach you? I'd love to hear. Leave a comment. That night Dara sat at her work table and did not work. She picked up her sketchbook, the one she'd had since Parsons, filled and refilled, the current incarnation mostly blank, and she turned to the page where she'd drawn the dress. The dusk-blue one, the long notes in the margins about the underlayer, the fall, the embroidery. She turned to the next page. Then the next. And she began to draw. She drew for 3 hours. She drew like someone who had been holding their breath for 3 years. She drew a whole collection, 8 pieces, and then 12, and then 16, each one building on the last with the coherence of someone who'd been designing in the dark for years. All those sketches in margins and the mental alterations she'd been cataloguing on 1,000 ordinary days, finally finding the page. At 2 in the morning, she stopped and looked at what she'd made. It was extraordinary. She sat with that knowledge like it might disappear if she moved. Then she took out her phone and called Nate. It was 2 in the morning. He picked up on the second ring. I have 16 sketches, she said without preamble. A pause right now. Yes. From tonight. From the last 3 years, she said, but yes, from tonight. She heard him shift, the quiet sound of someone sitting up. Tell me about them, he said. So she told him. She described each piece the way she would describe a person, not the visual dimensions first, but the emotional logic, what each garment was for, what it said about the body wearing it, and the person inside that body and the culture that had shaped them both. She talked about the textile archive she'd carried in her head since her grandfather's workshop in Accra, the colors that had no names in English, the weaving patterns that told stories in the thread itself. She talked about what she'd been observing in the 3 years of alteration work, what women's bodies actually looked like, moved like, needed from fabric, versus what the industry projected onto them. She talked for 40 minutes. When she finished, there was a quiet that was not empty. When can I see them? He said. I need to clean them up, maybe a week. 3 days, he said, if you can. Why 3 days? Because I have a board meeting in 4, he said, and I'd like to walk in knowing. Knowing what? That I found the person I've been looking for, a beat, knowing that I was right. Dara was quiet for a moment. You're very certain, she said. I was certain on Thursday, he said, when you told me about the embroidery. That was professional certainty. Yes, he said, and he left a silence after it that was not professional. Dara was very still. 3 days, she said. 3 days, he said. She called Sylvie Marchetti Laurent in the morning. Sylvie picked up with the wariness of someone expecting one of several kinds of calls. Dara. I need a favor, Dara said, not the kind you'd expect. Go on. I need someone who's been in the industry long enough to tell me if what I have is real, or if I'm too close to see it clearly. A pause. You want me to look at your work. You said you almost cried at Bushwick, Dara said. That means your eyes are calibrated for what I do. I need someone calibrated, not someone kind. Another pause, longer this time. Then, send me photos of the sketches. Dara photographed all 16 pages that afternoon and sent them in a single batch. Sylvie called back 40 minutes later. Okay, Sylvie said. She sounded different, less guarded, more precise, the voice of someone who had switched modes. 3 of these are very good, 2 are exceptional. 1, she paused, one I want to put on my wall and look at for a year. Which one? The one with the Kentweave bodice and the western cut trouser. The structural contrast. I've never seen anyone balance those 2 vocabularies without one dominating the other. That's the one I drew last, Dara said, at 2 in the morning. Of course it is, Sylvie said. The best ones always come last. She paused. Go see him, Dara. Show him the work. Stop asking permission to take up space you've already earned. Dara exhaled slowly. And the housing situation, she said. The one thing at a time, Sylvie said firmly. The work first. Everything else is solvable once the work is seen. Dara held the phone for a moment. Why are you helping me? She said, really. Sylvie was quiet. Then, because Damien Laurent is my ex-husband, she said, and I have been trying for 2 years to do something useful with the guilt. She arrived at the Verlaine studio on a Thursday morning with a sketchbook under her arm. Wearing the charcoal coat, she tailored herself and her grandmother's gold studs, and she took the elevator to the 6th floor, where the design studio overlooked the whole of Lower Manhattan in a grey October light that turned the city silver. Nate was there with 2 members of his design team, a young Senegalese woman named Fatoumata, who had a bun held in place by 2 pencils, and an older Japanese-Brazilian man named Helio, who was already looking at her with the mild suspicion of someone protective of their territory. She clocked this and respected it. This is Dara Osai Mensah, Nate said, and the way he said it, Not this is the woman I've been telling you about, or this is someone I'd like you to consider, but simply her name, said with a quiet sureness, told Fatoumata and Halio something that he hadn't needed to say in more words. Dara put the sketchbook on the table. She opened it. What followed was the most clarifying 2 hours of her professional life. She didn't present the sketches with the careful distance of someone hopping to be approved. She presented them the way she described them to Nate on the phone, with the full force of the logic behind each one, the cultural vocabulary, the technical decisions, the bodily philosophy. Fatoumata asked questions that were sharp and generous simultaneously, the kind of questions that people ask when they're trying to understand rather than challenge. Halio said almost nothing for the first hour, and then, in the second hour, began finishing her sentences, which was the highest compliment she'd ever received from a technical collaborator. Nate sat at the edge of the table with his arms crossed and said very little. He watched her. He watched the room respond to her. His expression was composed, but she had learned, in a very short time, to read the slight things, the way his jaw released when she said something that confirmed what he'd already thought, the way he blinked slowly when she said something new. At the end, Fatoumata looked at Nate. He looked at Dara. "The Kente-weave trouser suit," he said. "Tell me the production timeline you'd need if we put it in the spring collection." Dara took a breath. 16 weeks minimum if we source the Kente directly from artisan weavers in the Volta region, which we should, because the machine-made approximations won't give you the variation in thickness that makes the structural contrast work, which means we'd need to move on sourcing in the next 10 days. She paused. "I know a buyer. My grandfather's workshop still operates. I can make a call." The silence was different this time. It had the quality of something settling. Nate uncrossed his arms. "I'd like you to start Monday," he said. Dara nodded. She did not cry. She had known she wouldn't. She had used all of that at 2 in the morning over the sketchbook, but she felt something loosen in her chest that she had not realized until that moment, how long she had been holding. Halio, who had said very little, slid one of the sketches gently across the table toward himself and studied it. "This one," he said, "the collar construction, is that referencing the Kaaba silhouette?" "Yes," Dara said, "but inverted, the structural logic of the Kaaba, but released at the shoulder instead of held." Halio nodded slowly, still studying it. "I've been trying to solve that problem for 2 years, he said. He looked up. "Welcome," he said simply. She was in the elevator going down when she remembered Claudette. She hadn't thought about her once in the last 2 hours, which was its own kind of answer. She thought about her now, the thin woman in beige, the smile that didn't reach the top of her face, the question designed to diminish. She thought about the version of herself that had stood very still with her hand on a dress and decided how much of herself to spend. The elevator opened. In the lobby, sitting in one of the low chairs near the entrance with a cup of coffee and her phone, and the air of someone who had been waiting with strategic patience, was Sylvie Marchetti-Laurent. Dara stopped. Sylvie looked up, read her face, and smiled, a real one, the kind she clearly didn't deploy often. "The work spoke," she said. "The work spoke," Dara confirmed. Sylvie stood. "I have 2 things to tell you, one professional, one personal." "Professional first. I've been asked to consult on the board restructure that's coming at Velaine in the spring. I'll be in the building regularly." She paused. "I wanted you to hear it from me, not through the hallway." "I appreciate that." "The personal one," Sylvie looked at her steadily. "Damien has been trying to negotiate a settlement that would allow Mason Cartel to retain the disputed collection in exchange for a licensing fee. Nate's lawyers are recommending he take it." She paused. "I don't think he should. I think he should fight for it. I have no ability to tell him that, given my connection to Damien. But you," she stopped. "You think I have standing too. I think you're the person in his orbit right now who he'll actually hear." Dara considered this for a long time. "Why does it matter to you?" she said. "If Damien keeps the collection he pays, that's still something." "Because the collection is built on Nate's mother's archive. Sylvie said quietly, and his mother died while he was in the middle of the legal fight. And that archive is the only thing. She stopped. It should go home. Dara was still for a moment. I'll talk to him, she said. She talked to him. Not that day, not that week, even, because there were professional lines she was learning to navigate, and she moved carefully in the new space she'd been given. But 3 weeks into her role, on a Friday evening when the studio had emptied, and she and Nate were still at the table with fabric samples, and her revised sketches spread between them and the city outside the window going amber in the late afternoon, she said, "Tell me about your mother's archive." He looked up, and he told her. He talked for a long time about his mother, Abina, a textile scholar and weaver who had spent 40 years documenting traditional cloth-making techniques across West Africa, photographing, recording, interviewing the practitioners before the knowledge was lost. The archive was a lifetime of work. It was the foundation of everything Verlaine had been built on, not literally, not legally, but spiritually, philosophically. The archive was where the house's identity lived. Damien had taken copies of it, had built a collection from its vocabulary, was now offering money to make the moral wound technically financial and therefore manageable. "Your lawyers want you to settle," Dara said. "Yes. What do you want?" He was quiet for a long time. "I want it back," he said. "I want the collection pulled. I want them to have to unmake it." "Then say that," she said. "The legal risk." "Nate," she said his name the way he had said hers, plainly with weight. "You built this house on your mother's work. The settlement makes the theft permanent. If you accept it every time you walk into this studio, you'll know that somewhere in Paris there's a collection that was made from her hands, and you said it was worth a licensing fee." She looked at him steadily. "Don't let them have it." He looked at her for a long time. "Tell your lawyers you want to fight," she said. Something moved through his expression, something that had been held very still for a very long time. "Okay," he said. The case went forward. It was not quick, nothing in fashion law is quick, but it moved with a new momentum, fueled partly by documentation that Sylvie, in a final act of reparation, quietly provided to Nate's legal team through a third party, timestamps on files, communication records, evidence of the deliberate and systematic copying that had taken place. The evidence that a wife accumulates when she begins to understand what her husband has done. 8 months later, a judge ruled that 3 of the 5 disputed pieces in Mason Cartel's spring collection constituted substantial infringement of Verlaine's documented creative record. The collection was recalled from international distribution. The archive came home. When someone fights for what is rightfully theirs, even when the odds are against them, what does that cost them, and what does it give back? I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. The Verlaine Spring Collection launched on a cold February morning in Paris, in a converted textile warehouse on the left bank that smelled of wood and history, and the particular excitement of 200 people who understood what they were about to see. Dara stood backstage. She was wearing the dusk-blue dress. Not the original that one had been corrected, the embroidery adjusted by 4 millimeters, and was now on the floor of the flagship store for a client who had already claimed it. This was a second version. Made exactly to her measurements, which Nate had quietly authorized 3 months ago, and which had arrived in a garment bag on her office chair one morning with a note that said only, "It was always yours." She had worn it this morning with her grandmother's gold studs and her hair out in its full crown, and she had walked through the warehouse checking on her team and confirming running order and resolving 2 last-minute crises with the calm of someone who had been practicing calm under pressure for long enough that it had become something resembling peace. The collection was 16 pieces, hers all of them, with Halio's technical hands and Fatamata's structural genius, and Nate's particular gift for the curatorial.
This gown is
The sense of
exquisite,
what
but
a
it's not what
collection was
matters
saying
most.
rather than merely
What
what
we
it
exchange
contained.
here is far more
It was the most
important.
collaborative work she'd done since Parsons, and the most distinctly hers. The Kente-weave trouser suit opened the show. The weavers from the Volta region had sent 3 women with it, had insisted on attending, which Nate had welcomed, and they were in the audience now, in the third row, one of them wearing a piece of the same kente she'd woven into Dara's garment, which was the kind of thing that made fashion journalists cry and then write the best reviews of their careers. Zuri was also in the audience. She was sitting next to Nate's 12-year-old niece, and they had found each other in the first 3 minutes with the efficiency of children who recognize a peer, and they were currently sharing a program with the focused energy of two people who would be friends within the hour. Zuri was wearing a dress that Dara had made for her, not from a pattern but from her own eye, a midnight blue cotton with hand-embroidered butterflies along the collar, which Zuri had pronounced, after a careful inspection, the best one so far. Dara watched the first model take the stage from the wings. The Kentweave suit moved exactly as she had sketched it, the bodice holding the weight of the traditional cloth, while the trouser broke clean and modern below it, two vocabularies in conversation rather than conflict, the structure telling a story about inheritance and evolution, about honoring what came before without being held captive by it. The room was very quiet. Then it was not. After, in the long, bright, overwhelming after of wine and press, and embraces from people she hadn't seen in years, and several minutes of simply standing and breathing, Nate found her near the window overlooking the courtyard. He had a glass of something sparkling that he hadn't touched. "How do you feel?" he said. Dara thought about it honestly. "Like myself," she said, "exactly like myself." He looked at her, the particular quality of his attention, unhurried, complete, the look of someone who had learned the value of seeing clearly, settled over her like light. "That dress," he said. "What about it?" "You designed it 3 years ago," he said, on a permission slip. "I told you that in a coffee shop," she said. "That wasn't meant to be a permanent record." "It's the most important thing you've ever told me," he said. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because it means that even when everything else was gone, you were still designing," he said. "You never stopped being what you are, you just had nowhere to put it yet." Dara was quiet. "I'm putting it somewhere now," she said. "Yes," he said, "you are." They stood there for a moment in the particular quiet that exists between two people who have said the important things and are now standing in the comfortable knowledge of what comes next. "Zuri and Maya have exchanged numbers," he said. "I know, they've been talking for 20 minutes, and I think they're planning something." "Almost certainly," he said. "Maya plans things, constantly." "Zuri does too," Dara said. "I hope the city is ready." He laughed, a real laugh, the kind she'd learned in 6 months that he didn't produce often, and that sounded, when it came, like a door opening in a house where the windows had been closed for winter. She smiled. Outside the window, Paris was doing what Paris does, holding its breath and its light simultaneously, the grey stone of the courtyard warmed by whatever the February afternoon had managed to find in itself. A pigeon walked across the sill, with the confidence of a creature who had decided ownership of the world was a formality. "What happens next?" she said. "The fall collection," he said. "We start on Monday." "I mean," she stopped. "I know what you mean," he said. He didn't say anything else for a moment. Then he turned slightly toward her, not fully, just that half turn of someone choosing something, and said quietly, "I'd like to find out if you're willing." She looked at him. She thought about the woman she had been when she pushed through the door of this boutique on a Tuesday in October, late to pick up her daughter, her good coat the thing between her and the cold, her hands reaching for a piece of fabric to remember what she was. She thought about the embroidery, 4 millimeters off. She thought about Zuri's stories about a mother who was always a little sad, and the child's eyes that saw everything and the heart that kept trying to help. She thought about a dress that had 2 names, his and hers, and how that was not a coincidence but a conversation. "Yes," she said. That evening on the train back from Paris, Zuri fell asleep against Dara's shoulder somewhere between Gare du Nord and the Channel, her new friend Maya's number already saved in her phone, and a Paris Velling show program clutched in her fist like a prize. Dara looked out the dark window at the night landscape going by, the lights of small towns and farmland and stretches of black field, and held her daughter's weight against her and felt the quiet fullness of a thing that had been restored. Not returned to what it was, not rebuilt into the same shape. Something new made from everything that had survived. The dress was in a garment bag in the overhead compartment. The sketches for the fall collection were in her bag. The housing problem had been solved 6 months ago, practically, unglamorously, by a combination of a salary that was actually adequate and Amara finding a better apartment on her own terms, both of them moving forward in parallel the way people who love each other do. There was still legal paperwork, still the long administrative tale of the previous life. There would probably always be some tale to manage, because that was what it meant to be human and to have a history. But here, on a train in the dark, with her daughter asleep and a collection behind her and Paris still in the fabric of the dress above her head, Dara Osei Mensah felt something she had been quietly working toward for 3 years, without being sure it was still available to her. She felt like herself, exactly like herself. The train moved through the night. She closed her eyes. There is a version of you that never stopped. It was designing in the margins, building in the dark, holding on through every ordinary Tuesday. If this story spoke to something in you, a buried dream, a season of waiting, a moment when someone underestimated you, I want to hear about it in the comments. Tell me, what is it that you've never stopped being, even when the world forgot to ask? And if you want to see more stories about ordinary people carrying extraordinary things, subscribe, because every week we find another one worth telling.